proceed.
Hello, Ivan. I have to say, Ivan is your first name, right?
Yes, it's my
Yeah.
first
Okay.
Ivan.
Hello. Good to see you. Let's start by introductory question. Could you maybe describe briefly yourself as an artist, if you can?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ivan. I actually trained as a graphic designer at the beginning, and later on, I sort of get very much interested in what makes design as it is like functioning right now. The sort of like systematic question behind it, and and then later on, we discover how this system actually making the whole design practice as more like an alienated tool than like what it attempts to bringing people together. So from there, I sort of divert into sort of like the not so conventional artsy area because that's what you end up when you don't doing the not doing the conventional stuff. And so art world sort of like kept me there, and then I became an artist. But my interests continue as like someone who want to think with system, want to think with more meta level of structure, and then how through understanding these kind of underlying logic in the design, how we can redesign design and redesign institution, redesign many other things, hopefully gearing towards the idea of commons. So that's where I am right now. Yeah.
Great. So, could you describe a little bit or tell us a little bit about your project as part of Coming In, and what you're trying to redesign there?
Great. Yeah, sure. I'm bringing in one of my long-term project called Reunion Network. It's a project that started in 2017, sorry. Couple of years ago, where I started to sort of run into this blockchain maniac in that time, where I was kind of like bombarded by all kind of imaginary of the future with blockchain, but somehow I find that most of the design proposal solutions, they're more like thinking on the technology, not with the technology, without an actual vision about like what kind of society that we want. In fact, actually no one can really answer what kind of decentralized society we want and what does it mean. What does it mean?
Do you mean by this? What do you mean exactly by the distinction between thinking on and thinking with technology?
Well, like thinking on technology means that it's some kind of underlying Marshall McLuhan kind of thinking where people believe that when a technology is decentralized, then the society will naturally become decentralized. And so like people zoom in into how do we design and decentralize technology instead of thinking of what does it mean to have a decentralized society, and then thinking backward about what kind of technology we need in order to support that. So I would call that the later is thinking with technology and the former as thinking on. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you take us a little bit like to what you will be doing in a little bit concrete terms? What will people be participating in when they visit your work during Coming In?
Yeah, sure. So I would dial back a little bit about so after thinking about that, I starting to work on the project called Reunion. The Reunion and really starting from first thinking on the kind of how can we reimagine the social organization for sustaining our society. would mean and what kind of organizational form it will actually need. And to fast forward a little bit, the conclusion is that I want to create I think to create a network of what I call as new kinship as in the people who care about us in the long term, who will support us in a daily term, but not necessary with a blood kinship or marriage term. So to imagine that kind of network can work as the underlying structure for the society that creates um, flexibility, but also resiliency. And at the same time, I was also hoping that this kind of structure can lead to a kind of relational thinking where we are not really thinking of each other as competitive kind of beings, but very much relational and caring ones. Um, so the work that I will bring in with in the common sin is actually you can call it a simulation of sort, but it's actually a log game where people can participate and uh, so they're using the system that I have been designing for years to test and rehearse what kind of future that this kind of system may bring in, and then it becomes a collective future storytelling about what kind of society that we could have been together.
Mm.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about this LARP game and a little bit of the dynamics that are at play there and there's also I heard you also say earlier something about a currency involved there.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this thing work in the game?
Well, by sequence of like how you experience the game, at first when you get into the game, you sort of get a character card. On the character card, you sort of like see what kind of occupation that you have, what kind of age, and then there will be 6 attributes that describe your character's current status. These 6 attributes include available time, like how much free time that you have besides working and all, and your personal well-being, and your relational health, and your safety net, your stability, as in like the sort of social position that enables you to resist risk
Mm,
when things happen to you. And at the last one is finance. So starting from there, we already sort of put out 6 values of like how do we actually as a human being functioning well in a society that not only like financially but also mentally and relationally.
mm,
Um, so when you get that, you were starting to talk about, we will ask you to describe who you are, like based on this very bare minimal information. So
mm,
there people were starting to fill in the like those kind of character, how they stereotypically or not stereotypically imagining, for instance, what does a social worker life uh, looks like? What does a venture capitalist life look like?
mm,
We have a spectrum of characters that sort of representing the whole society structure. So when about 10 people can get to the card, and then they starting to get into, they immediately form a new society together, and and then starting from there, we they can build in the story to talk about who they are, and then in order to form a relationship with each other. And starting from there, you already run into a question like, oh, we're in a different age, we're in totally different class, can we be friends at all? uh, you know, um, the question, the interesting point there is that if everyone thinks that it's not possible, it's actually a comment on our current society that makes us believe that it's not possible.
mm,
But in certain area and certain people who experience cross-class or cross-generational relationships, they wouldn't think it's a problem.
mm,
So the game sort of work as a simulation of the future, but also a comments on the current as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's the basis when you're starting to find this kind of caring friendship across this kind of different parameters. And
Mm,
then there we will introduce the coin, the currency that I mentioned.
mm,
The currency is sort of a two parts thing. One, the first part is everyone gets a personal token that represent their own unique value in the society. Is automatically reissue every round of the game.
mm.
With this personal token, you can actually combine it with another person's personal token and become a relationship coin.
Oh.
And these relationship coin can be spent like it's equivalent of all the other financial coin, like the fiat coin that you will get in the game as well. But the relational coin is continuously reproducing as long as you have a functioning relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the relationship coin also can only be spent when two of you is consent to it. So the
Is sorry, two of you is.
is consent to the purchasing. Yeah, you have to both agree to in order to buy, because the relationship coin is actually a coin, a share asset of your relationship. So it has to be both of you to
Mm,
agree to it. So by these kind of mechanism, then we're starting to constantly creating the dynamic between people that like, I need your help. Can we use our relationship coin to do this and that? Um, and it's also a constant conversational point to check
mm.
in the story, how their relationship have been developed, going through and on and on. So the game sort of usually we will work around 4 to 5 hours. In theory, the game can go on forever because it's actually live. Um, everyone,
That's maybe what we want, what you want to achieve, no?
yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone is 5 years, so it only just go by the timeline. So
Mm.
as long as you're still not old enough that has to pass away in the game, you can always play. And so the game sort of like 5 years around in just within 10 minutes. So you have to collectively create a lot of story to negotiate, to bargain. Sometimes like you think that you can have a relationship with someone, but the other person think that like, no, our class is too different, or no, I don't think that I would like this kind of character at all. So all of these is like a mix of reality and fiction
Mm.
that is part of that character, part of the players, and also part of the future and part of reality. So in that sense, usually after 4 and 5 hours, we will have about 20 to 30 years passed in the game. So
Mm.
most of the people would sort of like experience sort of like a half lifetime. They will starting if they're starting as young person, then they will end up sort of like late middle age. If they're late middle age, they will go through very senior time. So
They will come out. They will come out of the game as different people.
well, some people does like, but at the same time, it's also they would starting to realize that many different aspects about themselves. Like,
Mm.
oh, I never thought of myself as this kind of person. I thought I'm super open, but actually in a relationship, I'm super conservative, for instance. Or some people, very interestingly, sometimes people draw a senior age character, and then their immediate thought is like, oh, my life is done. My life is over. But it's actually very poignant when almost, I would say, almost 90% of people started with that kind of thought. So you immediately see like, oh, how our society is actually devaluing the senior lifetime, where we
Mm.
all kind of like subconsciously think that like when you get old, you're like of no
Mm.
use. And so like at the end, it was like the character at the first round is always very passive when they get like the senior cards. And they were like, oh, I don't think anyone would be interested in me anyway. So
mm,
I would just like give up. But then after like the second round or something, they were like, maybe I can try. And but like because it's a game, I can't leave. And let me try. And then so that's the interesting point that becomes critical is that how the result of that character trying is very depending on the society that
mm,
they're living in. If the society, if everyone in that society is very open and helpful to the senior character, then the senior character usually will end up as like a very inspiring kind of figure in that
mm.
story. But if the society was very close, very stiff, or very much like conventional, then they are usually the old character will just like get frustrated and give up, and they were just like, okay, fine, whatever. That's my
Yeah,
yeah.
very interesting. I'm looking so much forward to it, and
Uh,
I think people will we will have a lot of people to join this. I hope. So
mhm,
you've done you've done earlier versions of this at the other end of the world, I think.
mhm.
Um, what did you what did you get out of that? What was your experience there, and what do you hope to get out of the Amsterdam version of it?
Um, I hope to get. I would say that I'm really look forward how the participant will teach me in the sense I offer a structure, and every time that every game session the participant always surprise me of something. It give me some kind of lens to look into what kind of society that they're living or what kind of character they are. So I felt like sometimes felt that I'm more educated by the participant than that. um, but of course, in terms of production, I already starting to experience a little bit like cross-cultural difference. For instance, I translated the event cards and translate the character cards and all that. But the structure in China, for instance, where the game started to design, uh, is a very particular society comparing to the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, then we need to talk about like we think about like how the structure of the Netherlands is very different. For instance, it's a country with relatively high welfare, but it has a overwhelming amount of freelancer labor. It also depending a lot of migrant issue, migrant labor. So all these are very different societal structure comparing to China. Like those features China doesn't have, almost doesn't have. So we will have to change the character, so the structure, and then we also have to change the personal events. How do we create a set of personal event that much closer to people's everyday experience in the Netherlands? And societal event, certain event, for instance, China has this habit of like when a big thing happen, like Olympic, for instance, then they just starting to stop all the business, stop everything, just for blue sky. That just doesn't happen in here. Just that like people couldn't, the government couldn't even get people to vaccinate. So that's that's a very different reality.
Mm,
So we have to change that kind of cars, and it's actually a very interesting way to re-understand the country, like the Netherlands that have been living for 10 years.
mm,
It's very interesting. Yeah, for
nice.
sure.
So I can see a lot of overlap, like with you know the work that Commons Network has been doing on the Commons and all these transitions that we're trying to
Mm,
make visible and work and build on and move towards together. That I can see coming back in your work that you're describing.
mm-hmm,
For instance, that there's a more not kind of an individual or in your words and work family nuclear family focused
mm,
approach and more a kind of networked kind of or community ish
mm,
approach of life, let's say in general,
yeah.
and also moving towards a more kind of caring society where care and regenerative practices play a more central role.
Mm.
How would you make the link between the commons and your work? Let's put it that broadly.
Wow. I mean, like I mentioned very earlier, when I discovered that design, the way that it it constructed the society or helped construct the society is very much alienated to people.
Mm,
It's sort of consider every individual is an isolated model, and then they will only want things because the model fits them. And but then like I thought that's actually not real life. Like in real life we are all quite relational beings. We sort of understanding each other through the constant negotiation and interaction with our surroundings and getting to know ourselves better, and how that was not present in the design discipline thinking. So I then starting to think about like what does it mean to be having a common. Like having a common means that like all of these relationship we feel very tangible and owning, and then knowing that we have a say in the progression of our relationship.
mm,
And I thought that is actually quite fundamental to have an idea of commons. So it became sort of like my design practice became very much geared towards common thinking, but
mm,
perhaps not in a sense of collectivism, but just like really in terms of like how do we have a better ownership over our relationship that is not alienated by platforms and corporate products, for instance, that like sort of turn us into competitive beings. Um, so yeah, that's basically from reunion is one of the case that are aiming towards care labor, as in I think care is such a relational labor
mm,
that you cannot remove the relational context out of the labor. For instance, how our mother cares for us is different from any like nursery or someone that we hire to take care of us. It's not about the skill, it's about the relationship. Maybe our mother is not so great in the caring skill, but it's still a unique kind of care labor that
mm,
we receive and offer. So I thought that's such an important labor and forms of economy that we have to learn from, and then we have to preserve this kind of unique characteristic in order to construct a common oriented economy.
mm.
So that's why I sort of like zoom into care a lot more these years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great. Thank you so much. It's really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Let's wrap up, and
Mhm.
we're looking forward to being there and experiencing it ourselves.
Yeah, super. I'm looking forward to that too. Yeah.